Converting fractions, decimals, and percents. So the first thing we're going to be talking about is converting decimals into fractions. So step 1, you want to determine the place value of the last number in the decimal. This becomes the denominator. Step 2, you're going to make the decimal number your numerator and then simplify your answer. So a good hint to remember this is you want to read the decimal out loud. Write it as you read it. Okay? So let's look at an example. So convert 46 hundredths to a fraction. You notice that the 6 is my last digit and it's in the hundredths place. You read it as 46 hundredths. So therefore you're going to put 46 over 100 and then you can simplify it to 23 over 50. Since you can divide both top and bottom by 2. So here are a few examples. Let's convert the decimals into fractions. So I'm going to read this as 6 tenths. So since 6 is in the tenths place, I'm going to put 6 over 10, and then I'm going to simplify it. So I can divide both top and bottom by 2, and my simplified fraction would be 3 over 5. Let's look at the next one, B. So we have 300. So since 3 is in the hundredths place, I'm going to put 3 over 100. And then I can't simplify this because nothing goes in 3 or 100. Let's try C, 175 thousandths. So since 5 is in the thousandths place, I'm going to put 175 over 1,000. And then I'm going to simplify. So what number is going to go into 175 and 1,000? Well, let's try 5. And remember, if you're not sure, you can write it out on the side. So let's see, how many times is 5 going to 175? $35 times? Okay. So 175 divided by 5 will give me 35. And then 1,000 divided by 5 will give me 200. And I can still simplify that by 5. So 35 divided by 5 would give me, I'm going to write it down here, 7. And 200 divided by 5 will give me 40. So 7 over 40 is my final answer for that. Okay? Alright, so let's talk about converting fractions into decimals. So step 1, you would divide the numerator or the top number by the denominator, the bottom number. Step 2, you're going to add zeros when needed and keep dividing until the decimal terminates or repeats. So terminate means that it stops, like it ends, or repeats, that means it's going to go on forever. The same, you keep on getting the same number on and on and on. So hint, see if you can make an equivalent fraction with a denominator of 10 and 100. This makes an easy conversion. So example, 3/5 can be written as 6 over 10 or 6 tenths. So since 5 can go into 10, then we can easily convert that. So an example would be convert 7/8 to a decimal. Well, 8 can't go into 10 or 100, so we have to actually divide the numerator divided by the denominator. As you see in the example, 7 divided by 8, you had to add zeros as needed and then divide. So 7/8 equals 875 thousandths. So let's try a few together. So 1/5, let's put this in a decimal. So see if 5 can be written over 10 or 100. Well, 5 can go into 10, So I can definitely write it over 10. So 5 times 2 is 10. So on the top would be 1/5 equals how many tenths is that? So I multiply by 2 on the top, and that would be 2 tenths. Well, 2 tenths in a decimal is 0.2. Let's try 4/3. Well, you notice that the denominator, it cannot go into 10 or 100. So I'm going to have to divide the numerator divided by the bottom number. So remember, the top number is going to go in your box. The bottom number is going outside the box. You want to add a decimal and then zeros. Put the decimal on top of the in the quotient. So 3 goes into 4 one time. 1 times 3. Bring down my 0. 3 into 10 goes 3 times. 3 times 3 is 9. Bring down your other 0. So as you can see, you're going to get a repeat, what's called a repeating decimal. Because 3 into 10 is also 3. So what repeats is a 3. So what we want to do is put a bar over the 3 that's repeating. This is the 3 right here. So I'm just putting a bar right there to notify that is actually repeating. So my decimal that's equivalent to 4/3 is going to be 1 3/10 repeating. C 1 1/8. Well, let's take a look at 1 1/8. So we know that the denominator cannot go into 10 or 100, so I'm going to have to divide the numerator by the denominator. So I know denominator, so that I know it's going to be 1 point something because of the whole number. So it's going to be more than a whole number. So let's divide the fraction. So 8 goes into 1. Add your zeros. 8 into 10 goes once. 1 times 8 is going to be 8. 2 left over. 8 into 20 goes 2 times. Be 16. 4 left over. Bring another 0, and an 8 can go to 40 5 times. So 1/8 equals 125 hundredths. And I got this whole number here, so I'm going to have to write it as 1 and 125 hundredths is my decimal. Okay? Okay, so that was, so far we did converting decimals into fractions. And then now we're going to be, and then we did converting fractions into decimals. So now what we're going to do is we're going to be converting percents into decimals. So you're going to, step 1 is to drop the percent symbol, and then step 2 is move the decimal 2 places to the left. You're going to divide by 100. So when you're converting a percent to a decimal, you're actually dividing by 100. Okay, so you want to notice an example that we divided 75% by 100. You're moving the decimal 2 places to the left. Okay, so let's take a look at the example. 22%. Well, we're going to drop the percent sign. Okay, and the decimal is right behind this last 2, and I'm actually dividing by 100. So make sure I'm just going to move the decimal 2 places to the left. So my answer is 22 hundredths. 195%. So again, I'm going to drop my percent sign, and then this is where my decimal ends, right here, after the 5, 2 places to the left, and my decimal is 1 95 hundredths. So this one right here is pretty tricky. So if I write 70 and 5/10 without the percent sign, so you notice where my decimal is, you have to pay attention to what your decimal is. So you're going to move 2 places to the left wherever your decimal was. So 1, 2. So now my decimal is decimal 7 So that's how you do converting percents to decimals. So you remember you're just moving the decimal place 2 places to the left, because really what you're doing is dividing by 100. Okay, let's talk about converting decimals to percents. Okay, so you're going to move the decimal 2 places to the right this time. So when you're doing a decimal to a percent, you're actually multiplying by 100. Then you're going to add the percent sign. So notice how we multiply 125 thousandths by 100. It moves the decimal place 2 places to the right. Okay, so we have 35 thousandths for the first example. So we're just going to move that decimal 2 places to the right. So now I get 3 5/10%. Okay. We have 2 41 hundredths. So again, I'm going to move my decimal 2 places to the right and then add the percent sign. So now I have 241%. And then lastly, I have 9/10. So here we go. Here's my decimal point right here. Move it 1, 2. And 9/10 equals 90%. Okay. So how do you convert percents to fractions? Well, step 1, you're going to write the percent out of 100. The percent is your numerator and 100 is your denominator. And step 2 is to simplify your answer. Okay, so 2%. So remember, when you're talking about percents, it is always out of 100. Always out of 100. So for example, 2%, I put 2 out of 100, and then I'm going to simplify. So I can divide by 2 on top, divide by 2 on the bottom, and then that will be 1 over 50 is my fraction. Let's take a look at 71 5/10%. Well, that's going to be 75 5/10%. So again, I'm going to put it over 100. So I'm going to put 71.5 over 100. And then I'm going to divide, I'm going to simplify it. But I don't want the decimal. I do not want the decimal in my numerator. So what I would have to do is, convert the percent into a decimal. So what I would move my decimal 2 places to the left, and so that's 715 thousandths. So I will just put that 715 over 1,000. Then I can reduce. And I can reduce that by 5. So 715, how much is that going to be? 1, 4, 20, 143. Alright, so this would equal 143, and then 5 into 1,000 would be 200. And I can't simplify that any further. So that would be my fraction. And then 240%, well, 240% is going to be greater than 100. So you know, since the numerator is going to be bigger than your denominator, it's really going to be 2 wholes 140 over 100. And then I simplify that as 2. And I can divide both top and bottom by 10, or 20 is the highest. So 40 divided by 20 is going to be 2. And 100 divided by 20 is going to be 5. So that is converting percents into fractions. And so we on this page we talked about converting percents to decimals, converting decimals to percents, and converting percents to fractions. So on the next page, we're going to be talking about converting fractions to percents. So divide the numerator by the denominator. Remember, the numerator is what goes inside my box, which is in the top number, and the denominator is going to go outside my box. So that's the out. You're going to move the decimal 2 places to the right and add the percent sign. So the example is 1/8. I want to do 1/8 to a percent. Well, first of all, I have to divide the numerator divided by the denominator. Well, 8 into 1 is going to give you 125 thousandths. So you take the 125 thousandths, then move my decimal to the right 2 places. So then I get 12.5%. So let's try 13 over 20. Well, you notice that in 13 over 20, 20 goes in 100. So I'm going to go ahead and write this as an equivalent fraction over 100. So 20 times 5 is 100. So 13 times 5 is 65. Okay. And I can write 65 over 100 as, in a decimal, I can write it as 0.65. And you know that percents come out of 100. So, or I can just say 65%. Or I can take the decimal and I can move it twice, 1, 2, which is 65%. Let's look at 1 9/10 again. Okay, you know that's going to be greater than 100% because there's a whole number 1. So let's take the fraction. Well, it does go more than, the 10 goes into 100. So that is really 9/10 is written 1. Well, how do you write 9/10 in a decimal? 9/10. I got 1 and 9/10. Just move my decimal place over twice to the right, and I get 190%. And the last one, well, 50 can go to 100 because percent is out of 100. I always want to try to see if it can go, the denominator can go in 10 or 100. It can. So 50 times 2 is 100. 72 times 2. Let's check it out. 2 times 2 is going to be 4. 7 times 2 is 144. So we got 144 over 100, which tells me that is going to be a greater percent. So that means it's going to be 144%. So that was converting fractions to percent. The next section we're going to be talking about is comparing and ordering. So step 1, you want to convert all values to the same type of number. So it's either you're going to convert everything in a fraction, a decimal, or a percent. Then compare your values. So let's take a look at number 1. So I have 3/8 and I have 3800. So I can either put both in a fraction or both in a decimal. Well, I think it's a little easier to put both in a decimal. So since I have 3/8, well, 8 can't go into 10 or 100, so I'm going to have to divide the numerator divided by the denominator, add my zeros. 8 into 30 goes what? 8 into 30 goes 3 times. 8 into 60 goes 77. And then 8 into 40 goes 5. So 3/8 is equal to 375 thousandths. And then I compared it 38 hundredths. Well, since 38 hundredths only have 2 decimal places and 375 thousandths has 3, I'm going to add another decimal place here. So now I have 3 decimal places. Now I can compare. So which one's greater, 375 thousandths or 38 hundredths? Well, the 38 hundredths is greater than that. Okay? Let's take a look at the next one. 1 and 4 tenths, or 1 and 4 fifths, or 1 and 4 hundredths. Well, I can either again change both into a decimal or both in a percent, or both into a fraction. Well, I think it's a little easier to get everything into a fraction. So we can convert, this is going to be 1, and then the 400. So let's do 4 100ths. Well, in order to compare fractions, I need a common denominator. So common denominator of 5 100 is going to be 100. So 4 fifths equals what over 100? That's times 2. That's times 20. 4 times 20 is 80, so 80 on top. 100 on the bottom, so I got 1 and 80 over 100ths, or 1 and 4 hundredths. So which one's greater? The 1 and 80 hundredths would be greater, or the 1 and 4 fifths would be greater. So let's take a look at 75% or 66 hundredths. I can either put both of them into a percent, or I can put them into a decimal, either or. So let's do percent. Okay, let's change 66 hundredths into percent. So remember, when you're changing a decimal into a percent, you're multiplying by 100, so that means you're moving the decimal 2 places, so that's 66%. So they're both in a percent, so 75% would be greater. And then we've got 40% and 2 fifths. Well, we can either put both in a percent or both in a fraction. I think it's easier to put both in a fraction. So we put percent over 100, so 40 over 100, since percent is always out of 100, and then I'm going to reduce. So I can reduce both by 40, or by 20, and I would get 2 fifths. So 2 fifths equals 2 fifths, which is equal. Okay, so the last thing we're going to talk about is actually ordering the numbers. So I have a fraction, a percent, and a decimal. So again, you can either get them all into percent, you can go all into decimals, or all into fractions. So I honestly think that is a lot easier to put it all into percents. So let's take this 52 and 1/5 percent. Okay, so we know that's 52. Okay, and then the 1/5, let's get this into a percent. So remember, percent is always out of 100. So 1/5 into a percent is going to be 20%, right? So that's going to be 52 1/5. Well, if 1/5 in a decimal is going to be 2 tenths. So 1/5 equals 2 tenths, so that would be 52 and 2 tenths, okay? 50 and 75 hundredths, and then the 52% would give me 0.52. Now I'm ready to descending. Remember, descending order is from greatest to least. Greatest to least. So greatest number would be, in a decimal, would be, the greatest number would be the 52 and 2 tenths, which is the 52 and 1/5. So I got that one. And then you would do the 50 and 75 hundredths. And last but not least, the 52%, because that's only 52 hundredths. It's a lot smaller than the rest of them. So there you go. That's least to greatest, or greatest to least. Yeah, greatest to least. Okay. Ascending order means least to greatest. Least to greatest. So for these set of fractions, I got 2 3/5, 2%, 2 7/10. Well, I can either put them all in fractions, decimals, or percents, but I think this time, I think it's easier to put it in a percent. So let's take the fraction, 2 3/5. Well, I know that's going to be greater than 100 because the whole number is 2. So let's get the 5 into a denominator of 10 and 100. So 3/5 out of 100, what's that percent? Times 20, so 3 times 20 is 60, so that's 60%. So we're talking about 60% plus 2 wholes would be 260%. Then 2%, and then 2.7%. Well, 2 7/10 would give me 270%. So which one's the least? Okay, well, they're all in percent, so the 2% would be the least. I'll put this in blue. 2% would be first, so that's done. The next one would be 260, which is equal to 2 3/5. The last one would be, the greatest would be 2.7. Okay, so the last one is descending order. You try that one on your own. That's 1 9/20, 1 1/5, and then 1 3/10, and 1 9/10. So what I would do is I would get this all into decimals. You do the last one. And then the next page that you have is going to be the practice. And so we're going to be doing that in class. So all you need to worry about is making sure you got the notes filled out.